Chain of Responsibility Laws, presented by UC Logistics Australia. Logistics the easy way. Did you know you are liable? What is chain of responsibility? Compliance and Enforcement Legislation, or COR, came into effect in Western Australia in April 2015 and included specific provisions extending legal liability for breaches of transport law to all parties throughout the transport chain. This means anyone who has control in the transport chain can be held legally accountable if their action, inactions, or demands cause or contribute to road safety breaches. The chain of responsibility laws have been introduced in the interests of national consistency to improve road safety, reduce damage to infrastructure, promote a level playing field for industry, improve deterrence and enforcement, and improve business efficiency and compliance. What are its key principles? Control, responsibility, legal liability. Any party who has control in transport chain can be held responsible and may be made legally liable. Who is responsible? Consignor or consignee, a person commissioning the carrying of goods and/or taking possession of the load. Packer or loader, placing goods in packages, containers or pallets. Loading manager, supervising loaders or packers. Driver, driving a vehicle. Operator, transport company or prime contractor operating a business which controls the use of a vehicle. In relation to mass, dimensions, load restraint, fatigue management, and speed of any commercially used vehicle, including utes, rigids, vans, and light vehicles, Western Australia believes that to gain maximum road safety benefits, it is essential that the chain of responsibility provisions apply to all vehicles, regardless of size. This also applies to transporting your own goods and utilising your own vehicles. Despite not physically transporting the goods, you might be personally liable for breaches in chain of responsibility laws. Current WA landscape. 46 prosecutions have been completed last year or are pending court action currently against parties other than the driver. In addition to that, there have been 199 infringements which have been issued to parties other than the driver. Since April 2014, 40% of prosecution charges have been preferred against parties other than the driver. Transport of goods is not just the driver's responsibility, it's yours too. Know your responsibilities. Responsibilities for all parties. We must encourage behaviour to mutually benefit all parties. Problems must be identified and communicated so that all legislative requirements are met. There must be appropriate documentation and proper communication between all parties. Responsibilities in relation to mass. Consignor or consignee must ensure that booked loads do not exceed maximum legal weight limits by providing accurate freight information to the transport company and loading manager. Must abide by the decision of the transport company or loading manager if freight needs to be left behind to meet legal weight requirements or load needs adjusting. Loader or packer must ensure that the vehicle load does not cause the vehicle mass limits to be exceeded. Must advise the driver of the actual or indicative weight of each pallet. Must engage with driver to load to best weight distribution. Loader can go to a higher authority if unsure or agreement cannot be reached about the loading. Must ensure that individual pallet weights are correct. Must ensure that load documentation is accurate, not false or misleading. Must ensure that goods packed in freight containers do not exceed the container's gross weight or safety approval rating. Pressure must not be put on the driver to load more than is legally allowable. The forklift driver or supervisor have the right to indicate if they believe there will be problems with the loading. Loading manager. Any changes between order and loading must be conveyed to the transport company and customer. Any adjustment in weight of loads should be flagged to both the transport company and the customer. The loading manager may rely on the driver of the transport company to determine how the load is placed in the trailers. Loads are loaded and placed on trailers according to customer and/or transport company load plans. National Heavy Vehicle Accreditation label must be checked for higher mass limit compliance. Driver must load according to the load plan or consider the gross weight of each pallet if load plan isn't available. Must assess any changes between order and loading. Has final say in placing of pallets in a vehicle. Must engage with loader to load to best weight distribution. Driver is responsible to ensure that the vehicle does not exceed maximum limits. Driver should have access to documents issued to the vehicle, so they know the tare weight of the vehicle combination prior to loading. Driver or loader can go to a higher authority if unsure or agreement cannot be reached about the loading. Drivers can present to staff of loading or unloading facility and be given opportunities to check load plan and freight prior to loading and to flag any concerns they may have. The driver has the right to refuse the load or part thereof. Transport company must ensure that vehicles do not exceed legal mass limits and that the driver has accurate documents issued to the vehicle. Must ensure load plan for vehicle combination does not exceed legal weight limits. Must ensure that legal axle limits are not exceeded. Must ensure that if operating under higher mass limits, transport company must provide proof of accreditation or vehicle will be loaded to standard mass limits. Responsibilities in relation to dimensions. Consignor or consignee should ensure that transport operators are legally registered and permitted to undertake the job they are contracted to complete. Driver should ensure that they are driving a legally permitted and registered vehicle. Should be aware that they have all documentation pertaining to the permitting of the vehicle available to him. Transport company must supply legally permitted and registered vehicles that meet the legal dimension requirements. Responsibilities in relation to load restraint. Consignor or consignee must ensure that transport companies are given correct and appropriate information so that they can provide supply suitable vehicles and adequate equipment for the load. Any breaches to be reported to all parties. Loader or packer must ensure that the vehicle is loaded so that it does not become unstable or move inside the vehicle. Packer must ensure that product is safely packed. Loading manager must ensure correct procedures are used so that the load is securely restrained. Must check when truck arrives to ensure that stock is not shifted or become unstable due to lack of load restraint. Must report to customer any incident so that transport companies are made aware of any problems. Must allow drivers access to the loading area to supervise and/or participate in the load restraint process. Driver must ensure that load is correctly restrained so that freight cannot move during transit. Must have access to loading area or dock to supervise and/or participate in the load restraint process. Transport company must ensure that the driver has sufficient equipment and is provided with sufficient training to use it correctly. Responsibilities in relation to fatigue management. Consignor or consignee must ensure that transport companies are given correct and appropriate information so that they can provide supply suitable vehicles and adequate equipment for the load. Any breaches to be reported to all parties. Loader or packer must ensure that the load is loaded in a timely manner, without unnecessary delays. Must ensure that the load is ready to be loaded at the agreed loading time. If either or both are not possible, this should be reported to a higher authority so that appropriate action can be taken and all relevant parties are advised. Loading manager. If a driver appears fatigued or not fit to drive, loading manager should contact the transport or site manager. The transport company should be notified and the loading manager will cease loading until a physical assessment of the driver or alternative arrangements can be made by the transport company. If the loading manager site has delays and cannot have the load ready for the time slot, the loading manager must notify the transport company as soon as they are aware of the delay. The loading manager should contact the transport company if the truck does not arrive on time, must report to customer any incident so that the transport companies are made aware of any problems. Loading manager site must not have queues. They should have a call-up system whereby upon arrival, the driver checks in with the appropriate office. The call-up system must allow for the driver not to breach his legal driving hours and a truck parking area and facility should be provided. Driver must adhere to the driving hours regulations and take required rest breaks. Must record driving hours as required under regulations. Must ensure they are fit for work. Must ensure that they have legal available driving hours to complete the designated journey. Must communicate any delays to the transport company. Must check that the time slot at the destination is appropriate to be completed within the legal driving hours, and must ensure that safe and responsible driving behaviour is demonstrated at all times. Transport company must ensure that driver rosters and schedules do not require drivers to exceed driving hours regulations and are able to take required rest breaks. Must keep records of the driver's activities. Must have contingency procedures in place to cope with unexpected circumstances. must ensure drivers are fit for work, and must check that the time slot at the destination is appropriate to be completed within the legal driving hours. Responsibilities in relation to speed. Consignor or consignee must ensure that schedules do not put pressure on drivers to exceed the speed limit. Must ensure that appropriate time is factored for the job to be completed without requiring the driver to speed. Must ensure that contracts include speed compliance and that it is monitored. Loading manager must ensure that loading and unloading arrangements do not require drivers to speed. Must regularly review loading and unloading times and delays. Must identify potential bottlenecks in unloading and loading, and must ensure that time slots can be relied upon. Driver must ensure that speed limits are observed at all times, and that safe and responsible driving behaviour is demonstrated. Transport company must ensure that driver schedules do not require drivers to exceed the speed limit. Must ensure that vehicle speed limiters are functioning. Must develop contingency plans to deal with scheduling issues and problems with meeting deadlines. Must provide a method for driver to report delays or other problems, and must ensure that delivery times do not put pressure on drivers to exceed the speed limit. What happens in case of a COR breach? All parties, including yourself, must demonstrate and prove they did not know of the breach. They could not be reasonably expected to have known. They took all reasonable steps to prevent the breach, or no steps could have reasonably been taken to prevent the breach. Potential fines. Personal fines up to $250,000. Company fines up to $1 million. What can you do to ensure reasonable steps are being taken? Reviewing business practices, changing commercial arrangements, adopting a risk management approach, appropriate training policies, appropriate supervision, and ensuring responsibilities are known. Understanding your responsibilities. Know and comply with the law. Ignorance is no excuse. Identify, assess, and manage risks. Liability for both actions and inactions. Maintain a documented, auditable process. Do not rely on compliance of others. For more information, call us on 1300 154 234 or email compliance@uclogistics.com.au. Thank you for your contribution to road safety.